is the fuel of our existence. There are nearly 8 billion of us on the planet today, and each of us needs food every day. But the way we get food has been problematic for the last many decades. Industrial food production, our go-to option, has a severely negative impact on our environment. How can we course correct now so that our future generations don't go hungry? That's what we'll talk about today. Hello and welcome to Eco India. I'm Sanuta Raghu. Let's start today's show in West Bengal. Here, food production is not just about feeding the population. It's also about giving rural women a path out of poverty. A lack of education has often held women back, but a local organization is empowering them to set up their own nursery businesses. Let's see how.
Life is hard for 21-year-old Rojina Khatun, as it is for the most of the women in this village. They grew up poor, married young, and were forced to turn their backs on their education.
My father's income was low, so I wasn't able to study beyond class 9. I have 4 sisters, but our father's income wasn't enough to support us all. That's why we were all married off.
The women here in Chakla in West Bengal are responsible for the housework and the children. They are financially dependent on their husbands. When money is tight, they borrow funds from private credit providers. Just like Fatima Bibi, she used her wedding jewelry as collateral, although really she never wanted to borrow money.
But when I was in a tough financial situation, I did pawn off my jewelry and haven't been able to release it yet. We've also heard of other people around us who've pawned off their jewelry and gold, but haven't yet been able to buy it back either.
It is a widespread problem in this region, says Abdul Nasser. He set up the Zero Foundation, which is trying to help improve women's lives in Chakla.
Especially women's.
They usually give women loans, not men. However, the women are mostly uneducated and don't know how much they've been loaned or how much they need to repay. Because they've not been educated, they aren't able to calculate properly or do any kind of accounting. It's a kind of exploitation that goes on here.
The situation changed when Abdul Nasser began to reach out to the women. He estimates that just 1 in 5 of them here can read and write. And that's what his organization, which is financed primarily through donations and scientific projects, zeroes in on.
So we make arrangements for their learning, particularly Bengali language, mathematics, and English.
Basic English. The
first stage is their education, and then we implement different types of income-generating projects.
Income generation, different project implement.
Nurseries are one such project. The Zero Foundation helps the local women set up self-help groups. They are then able to lease land from farmers. They buy fresh soil to prevent damage and nutrient loss, making yields more reliable. This way, they can also avoid using pesticides, in contrast to bigger nurseries in the region. Rojina Khatun now works here, in addition to her normal housework.
When we first started the nursery, we didn't know much about gardening and how to grow the plants. There was another nursery next to ours, so we referred back to it and taught ourselves how to care for the plants.
The women's groups finance their activities through microcredit loans from a cooperative bank in the region. Abdul Nasser's foundation helps them gain access to legitimate funds.
Financial transactions?
Their financial transactions are quite transparent. The savings, banking, and loans are done through the cooperative department. For rural people, this is a better method. Plus, they won't need external funds.
Better method. Plus
the government already has a lot of funds that we can use here. We don't need money from external agencies.
The women sow seedlings of guava, different varieties of kul or Indian jujube, lemon, coconut, and mango. Then they sell the young plants to the bigger local nurseries. Their work adds another valuable income stream to their family.
I've been able to construct a concrete house with a proper roof, gate, grills in the window, and a bathroom. I've also been able to buy my son's textbooks on time and enroll him in a private school.
Chakla village is located in the Brahmaputra Delta. Sediment deposits left in the river tributaries makes the soil especially fertile. But climate change is making the area particularly vulnerable to storms, which are increasing in strength. A cyclone last year had a very serious impact.
Cyclone Amphan was a serious problem and has badly damaged the land and plants.
The Zero Foundation donated 200,000 rupees, around 2,200 euros, to help deal with the destruction. In future, the women will dig channels between the seedlings to avoid water damage during heavy rain. More than 300 women in the region belong to a total 9 self-help groups. It might have added to their workload, but earning their own living in the nurseries makes them proud and more independent.
As we just saw, the local organic food production that's helping women find their freedom is the exception rather than the rule. Our default, which is our consistent dependence on industrialized food production, has massively decreased the genetic diversity of plant crops. Genetic variety ensures that our planet as a whole thrives. Can seed banks help in bringing back some of this diversity? Let's find out.
The Earth produces a rich variety of plants adapted to wide-ranging habitats around the globe. There are around 400,000 species known to science. Less than 10% are edible. Corn, rice, and wheat account for more than half the global food supply. Ever since humans began adopting a sedentary lifestyle, they have collected seeds to plant. The first crops were cultivated over 10,000 years ago by farmers in Mesopotamia, now modern-day Iraq and Turkey. Some 200,000 varieties of wheat alone have developed from that early stock. Having a wide range of crops and genetic diversity within each variety helps to secure our food supply. The greater the diversity, the smaller the risk of wheat or some other staple being wiped out worldwide by a single pest or disease. That's why seed banks are so important. The oldest is in St. Petersburg and dates back to 1894. Today, the seed bank in Gattersleben, Germany, boasts one of the world's most diverse collections. Many of the seeds stored here are found nowhere else. Large seed archives have now been established all over the world. They each collect various seeds and plants from different regions. Many are then stored at the Global Seed Vault on the Norwegian island of Spitsbergen. But out in the fields, the trend is towards less diversity. During the 20th century alone, an estimated 75% of crop diversity was lost, according to the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization. The reasons are many and varied. The industrialization of agriculture meant crops suddenly had to fulfill different requirements. They have to produce a high yield, all ripen at the same time, and not suffer damage when being harvested by heavy machinery. Our modern globalized trade network means fruit and vegetables now need to stay fresh while being transported over long distances. Very few varieties can live up to those demands. The range of produce in our supermarkets is deceiving. The tomatoes and cucumbers may look different, but genetically they're very similar. This genetic poverty is not without risk. In the 1970s, for example, a virus destroyed 1/4 of the rice harvest across the whole of Asia. It was only through crossbreeding the rice with a wild variety that the crop became resistant to the virus, thus rescuing the world's single most important food staple. For thousands of years, farmers have collected their own seeds and swapped them amongst themselves to improve their harvest and develop new varieties. But in recent decades, a steadily declining number of seed companies has been selling an increasingly limited range of sorts. 95% of cabbage varieties, for example, have already disappeared. The companies design their own crops and secure them with a patent. They supply 2/3 of the global market. Often farmers are unable to collect seeds and are required to buy certain fertilizers and pesticides. But a growing number of people worldwide are seeking to reverse this trend by increasing crop diversity and distributing seeds without patents. A non-profit organization in Austria called Arche Noah, or Noah's Ark, collects seeds of old endangered varieties. It propagates the seeds and then passes them on to a supermarket chain, which sells both the seeds and their produce.
Industrialized food production is often synonymous with the use of pesticides, a cocktail of chemical substances used to protect plants from pests. We now know that these substances are detrimental to our health and the health of the environment. Our reporter explores how feasible it is to produce food without chemical pesticides.
Everybody hates a pest. And since the dawn of agriculture, we've been trying to keep them away from our food. Ancient Greek and Egyptian communities trained their cats and even domesticated mongooses to keep locusts and rodents away from their cereals and fruit crops. Some European communities were more inspired. From bagpipes to flutes, some tried to keep their gardens and farms in bloom with the right music. But even in the 20th century, we saw ludicrous methods of pest control, like in China, where the entire country declared war on mosquitoes, flies, sparrows, and rats, killing millions of each. Keeping pests away in whatever way possible has been necessary to avoid famines and increase food availability. But pest control really blew up in the global north in the post-war pesticide era, where chemicals were synthesized from organic compounds and used widely for the first time. This was a huge leap forward as crop yields shot up and the developing world had its so-called Green Revolution. Chemical fertilizers and pesticides flooded the market, and high-yielding seeds began to be used across the global south. Some estimates say it saved over 100 million lives in countries that were on the verge of a food crisis. For a while, economies prospered as more people were fed. It seemed like a magical solution had been found. Lately, however, this method of farming has seen a lot of critics.
Yield is getting more per unit of area of any given crop. Now, you can do that by improving the genetics of the crop and then throwing chemicals at the ground, and for a while that might work. In the long term, of course, what you end up with is causing all kinds of soil chemistry problems. And so, for example, in Punjab in India right now, in the epicenter of the Green Revolution, you see soil fertility plummeting.
One intrinsic problem is the way in which pesticides work.
You have this thing that is called the pesticide treadmill. The more pesticide you apply, the more you need to apply. It's almost like a junkie. You get addicted to it, no? The more you take, the less effective it becomes, and the more you need to apply.
Yvette Perfecto has spent her career studying herbivores and pests and how they react and respond to pesticides.
It's like us evolving resistant to an antibiotic, no? They are effective to some extent, but then eventually, especially if you abuse them, then you evolve resistant to them. The same thing happened with insects. They evolve resistance to the pesticides. So the more you apply, the more resistant the population become and the less effective the pesticide becomes.
Coating the soil indiscriminately also leads to other species dying off. In the last 30 years, global insect populations around farms have declined by up to 75%. And that's not all. Runoffs from farms fill rivers with chemicals, and when they drain into the ocean, they kill off large populations of wildlife from sharks to turtles and whales, like in the Gulf of Mexico's dead zone. Not to mention that spraying pesticides also causes farmers problems from skin rashes to long-term lung damage. And the residues that remain on produce can cause long-term health conditions among the people that eat the fruits and vegetables. That's a lot of negatives. But proponents of industrial farming say alternatives are either too expensive to scale worldwide or use too much land, especially as our remaining forests need protection now more than ever. But is this still true? Organic is the umbrella term for anything grown without chemical pesticides. Regulation for what is and isn't organic vary by country, but generally fall in line with natural biological systems and protecting water, soil, air, and biodiversity. Organic farming methods can include introducing natural predators to keep pests away, or growing multiple crops to improve soil health, and even using organic pesticides that are generally less toxic than chemicals. This does lead to more land needed for agriculture and less yield overall. The jury's still out on whether organic food is actually much more nutritious. But what is certain is that organic vegetables contain far fewer pesticide residues and are therefore healthier. But there are a lot of grey areas. Organic farms can be small scale and cater to local communities, or they can be large and industrial, transporting food over large distances, sometimes overseas. So not all organic farms mean local and happy and pure. With so many ifs and buts, how do the two compare?
We had looked at 40 years of all the studies done comparing organic with conventional farming.
Reginald and his team found that while conventional farms produce 10 to 20% higher yields, organic farming is not only better for the environment, but, and most surprisingly,
it was more profitable, significantly so. And part of that reason is because organic farmers get a premium for their food. They get more money for their food. Over that 40-year period between 1975 and 2015, the premium averaged about 30% more.
This high price of organic food can't be ignored though. Eggs cost up to 3 times more in Germany, where I live, for example. Organic milk is double the cost of conventional milk. But at the moment, of all the farmland around the world, the share of completely organic farms is just 1.5%. As this grows, the price of organic produce is expected to fall to make organic food more accessible. In fact, prices have already largely started to fall in the last 10 years around the world. But do we need to cut down more forest, or can organic yields sustain the world?
Our studies show very convincingly that that given the yields that are produced in organic agriculture and the amount of food that is needed to satisfy the nutritional requirement of the human population, that it is possible with organic agriculture to produce enough food to feed everybody.
Many other studies have come to the same conclusion, but with one major caveat: our diets. If people ate only vegan food, 100% of the population could be fed on organics using just the land we already farm on. Vegetarianism would give this a 94% success rate, and a Western-style meat-heavy diet gives this a 15% chance. There is another big factor as well: inefficiency. Right now, a third of all the food we produce worldwide gets wasted.
And we also basically produce a lot of, I wouldn't call it food, but there's a lot of grain that's produced to feed cars for ethanol or, biofuels.
A good example of inefficiency of land use is corn. Most corn harvested in the US goes directly to feed animals or to be burned as fuel, while less than 1/10 enters the food system. So in theory, we could feed the world with just organic food, especially with a more plant-based diet and more efficient farming systems. But do we need to get rid of all pesticides? Maybe we don't need to be so radical.
And it might be we live with some of these synthetic chemicals, but we use them just to tweak. We use them in very small amounts. We use them more as a last resort.
Around the world, more and more farmers are integrating their farms, growing organic crops with pesticide only when needed, or targeting certain crops rather than flooding fields with chemicals. So the question is, what can we do as conscious consumers?
Your fresh produce, buy them more locally, know your farmer. They tend to be organic.
Governments are going to support farmers. They need to incentivize good farming practices. Say for growing cover crops, they should be supported for longer crop rotations to help them do it. They should be supported to convert to these more integrated and organic systems.
The best thing that you can do as an individual is to join a movement. Whether that movement is the International Peasant Movement, La Via Campesina, which has hundreds of millions of landless workers, farmers, peasants, and supporters around the world, or whether it's some of the other movements making dramatic calls for systemic change in the way that we operate.
The movement to ditch chemicals is growing. And between farmers, consumers, and the state doing their bit, we could one day make these cheesy, happy farms a reality.
As we saw earlier in the show, genetic diversity of crops is worth preserving. On the outskirts of Bengaluru, we met a man who runs a community garden. And in this age of rapid globalization, he set a lofty goal of growing and promoting traditional regional seeds. Let's see how he does it.
A typically traditional Indian meal. Rice or bread served with a variety of side dishes, each made up of a number of ingredients. But as India has urbanized, so too has the way its people eat. Meals have become faster, easier, and much less diverse, with many ingredients even being flown in from around the world. A study found that around a third of what Indians eat comes from abroad. Artist and gardener Suresh Kumar is the force behind a movement to save indigenous foodstuffs. He has founded a revival project called Sarjapura Curries. It encourages people to grow local and seasonal foods that have slowly disappeared from their lives.
Actually, the recipes didn't change, but the ingredients became very less. So people, when they made in the peak season, they would add 15 to 20 kind of herbs and greens in one curry. Now it has come to 2 or 3 types, which most of them are buying from the shops. And the shops are selling what farmers are growing, and farmers are growing what seeds people are selling.
Kumar runs a community garden on the outskirts of Bengaluru in the village Volagere Kalahalli. It is filled with interesting crops that are hyper-local and now rare. This squash-type fruit used as a vegetable in cooking is a bottle gourd.
We have to break open this part here. Now the treasure is inside. See, these are the seeds. So each seed can give you at least 10 bottle gourds because it's a heirloom variety. And it can be around like 5 to 6 kilos. It can feed like 2-3 families.
As well as producing foods with a better taste and flavor, heirloom seeds are thought to produce more nutritious fruits and vegetables. Many edible plants once grew around the village, but villagers have lost the skills to harvest them.
The current generation doesn't know what is edible and what is not edible, so they can't go and forage. And even if they wish to go and run, the landscape is not clean anymore. You see a lot of stray dogs, a lot of construction vehicles moving around and things like that. So that is the reason actually I want to revive them.
And it's not just learning to forage. In past months, at least 15 rural families have been inspired by the project. They have started their own kitchen gardens that meet around 50% of their daily needs.
To feed all the people who live on the planet is no small feat. Industrialized food production seemed like a great idea in its early days, but now that it's extractive, new ideas are the need of the hour. I hope the ideas we shared with you today have made you think about where your food comes from and how we can make it more environmentally friendly. I'll see you again next week with many more such ideas. Until then, goodbye.